Putin's mobilization speech sent clear signals. The threat of nuclear war is not to be underestimated, as EU officials are warning today that Putin is not bluffing on the subject. So what happens next? And should we believe Putin's message to his people? Joining me today is the defense editor of the Evening Standard newspaper, Robert Fox. So, should we be taking Putin's threats seriously?
We should be taking Putin seriously, and we should be extremely worried about his state of mind, because he is making very wild claims all over the place. This massive mobilization of forces. He said he wants to call up an extra 300,000 personnel for the fight in Ukraine. It's quite clear that he's using the apparatus of the police and military state in Russia to go through all kinds of communities, upsetting communities through almost all of the 11 time zones of Russia. For what purpose is not clear. It looks as if he's aiming actually to mobilize 500,000. If you sent 500,000 into the parts of Ukraine where Russians are, they just simply wouldn't be able to support and sustain them. How are they going to train these people? Because they're losing their best equipment on the battlefield. There isn't enough equipment for a new army, and there aren't enough trainers.
Now, Con Coughlin, he's the defense editor at The Telegraph, he said these are just empty threats and they show that Putin has nothing left. Is there some truth to that? Is he just sort of throwing things out to try and scare the West?
Well, far be from me to comment on one of my oldest friends and colleagues in the business. Con and I take roughly the same view. There is a lot of emptiness in this, but you're right in your question. It is not all entirely empty. And the daft bit, if I may say, that's the way that we have to look at it, and Con's right about this, is the threat of using weapons of mass destruction. And remember, I didn't say nuclear, because the real fear must be, yes, he may use tactical nuclear weapons. We can talk about that in a minute, because I think he'll be very reluctant to use them in the areas he's talking about annexing, the 4 parts of Ukraine. I'm more worried about his use of chemical weapons of the indiscriminate kind that we have seen Russia sanction among their Syrian allies, if not aid them in using in Syria.
Now, am I right in thinking that the Russian state propaganda perhaps is starting to fall on deaf ears when it comes to ordinary Russian people? We've seen reports that Russians are attempting to flee the country so that they don't have to go to war to fight the Ukraine. And there also, some of the state TV seems to be changing a little in its narrative.
We've had criticism on state TV for the first time, which is really quite something. Where they can, young men, and it's young men primarily, are rushing to the border. But of course, a lot of the borders are closed now, particularly into the Baltic states to the north, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. But the big choke point is Georgia. Yes, they are fleeing. Yes, there has been criticism on state media, but the real information battle, the really big one that's happening now, is in social media, where Russia has been devoting a huge effort, reported in the New York Times today, to shutting down things like Telegram, all kinds of, there are versions of WhatsApp. And in fact, the underground social media coverage of this thing has been really very, very remarkable. They're using an incredible amount of labor, of people to do this. Funny enough, the Chinese, when they do this, they do it much more effectively, and they do it with machinery and technology. But to go back to you, the way that you started this interview, you are absolutely right. There seems to be something absolutely desperate about the way Putin is behaving. Oh, by the way, he's just fired his deputy defense minister because he should have been in charge of logistics. That's moving around, supporting forces, getting this new recruitment drive really going, so you can get 300,000 into camps, into being trained. And obviously that isn't going well. So he's fired that guy, saying he's responsible. And I think there are real tensions now between the generals and Putin. and also his old security buddies of the former KGB, now the FSB. And somehow, if there's a crunch there, I think that they will get him out, but they will fight to get their particular candidate to take over. Things are a bit wobbly at the moment this weekend. I think this is the general sensation. And that's why, as usual, Vladimir Zelensky's propaganda, his information campaign, is absolutely brilliant. He brings up a new subject every night. He said, look, I'm on board with you, with my people. He never called them my people, fellow Ukrainians. Look, this is what's happening. That's what's happening. And he's showing that he's on the case and as bright as a button. And he's more on the case than Vladimir Putin.
Yes, and just finally, I want to get your thoughts on, well, something that's been concerning me recently in particular. I've seen a lot of some people, mostly on social media, admittedly, seeming to parrot Putin lines from Russian propaganda lines that we shouldn't be giving so much money over to Ukraine because they're just money laundering it, and that there's some kind of conspiracy that this war is intended to go on and cripple us financially. All sorts of talking points like that seem to be being spread far and wide. Could you please just put your point across to perhaps debunk those?
Of course, it's all a huge CIA plot. Zelensky's a CIA plot. The Maidan uprising in 2014, which really started this, all entirely, of course, was a CIA plot. I'm sorry to indulge in this, because, of course, my Twitter feed is completely polluted with this stuff. Some of it is genuine cranks, the work of genuine cranks. You always get them. But quite certainly, a lot of this is Russian, Moscow-inspired trolling. It's a desperate campaign. Is it having an effect? As of now, not much, because the two key alliances, NATO and I must say the EU, have stuck with it. Russia is trying to chisel away at bits of Asia and bits of Africa, with whom countries where they've had links, to get support there. But the one big one which isn't buying this is China. And China, if this is going to be settled, it's not going to be settled on Russia's terms. If they come in, and they may come in after October the 5th, when Xi gets reconfirmed, as he hopes, for another 10 years, running things in China, it will be settled entirely on China's terms.